Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Ronna, and we are continuing our series of shows related to what people can do right now at this season of the year instead of buying stuff to make a difference in the world, to spend money in ways that really do change lives for the better, and ways to give of yourself as well in ways that make the world better. So, as you know, last week we had women from Safe Futures on. This week, my guest is Joanne Sheehan. She has been on the show in the past, probably a few times.
Several times, yeah.
Is a long-time member of the local peace community. And when I was planning these shows, I thought, oh, we need to have one about peace. So, welcome, Joanne.
Thank you, Ronna. Glad to be here again. Yeah.
I guess I'll start and just ask you, what kind of things have you been involved in that are peace-related, probably like since the 60s, right?
Well, yeah, actually since the 60s, that's right. I got active when I was in high school. I come from a family that's been involved in things in many ways, and particularly an uncle who was involved in the civil rights movement, and so when I was in high school. So I think that really, that and then followed up by the war in Vietnam, since that was really affecting people my age quite a bit. The year I graduated from high school was the first year the draft was a real threat for young men. And so that really got me involved in kind of making those connections and looking at nonviolence, because I was very influenced by the nonviolence of the civil rights movement. Went to college and got very, very active in things, and then moved to New York City and continued to do a variety of things in working with a number of groups. Became a nonviolence trainer. Again, kind of saw the connections, was one of the national organizers for the Continental Walk for Disarmament and Social Justice, which went through here in southeastern Connecticut. Then moved up here in 1976 to live at the Community for Nonviolent Action.
Well, you know, right now, we really can't get away from the fact that there's a need for more nonviolence in the world. Just over the last month or two, there have been developments that have really brought things to a head on several fronts. The CIA reports, which were recently released, the recent killings by police officers and of police officers that have been very polarizing. And you know, and here locally in New London, an article from the paper from just a couple days ago that our local police department has requested $28,000 for riot gear. And so what can we start thinking about doing in the here and now to shift the priorities?
Right. And I think it is difficult to think, because I think a lot of people say to me, but there's so much happening, I don't know what to focus on. I mean, really, what do you do, right? There are people trying to close Guantanamo, and people who have been doing a lot of good anti-racist work for a long time. We've got pipelines coming through. We've got a lot of things that we have to work on. And I think for me, and I think for the organizations I'm involved in, particularly as the regional organizer for the War Resisters League and as the chair of the Voluntown Peace Trust, that having that understanding of nonviolence and nonviolent social change, of kind of looking at how can we help train people, how can we help give people those skills that are needed, because skills are needed to kind of understand how change has happened and how we can make it happen.
And I want to just point out from my own view, I am, and some people might or might not know that, I'm really fiscally very conservative. I hate spending money if it's not going for something useful. And when I read the article about the police asking for riot gear, I'm thinking, this is a poor city. The citizens are taxed. Is this really the most useful way to spend our money for gear that we hope the police will never ever use? And can't it be used for training? Can't it be used to increase a community policing program? Or maybe it can be used in a wholly different way to help education, help our schools or help get trash or graffiti cleaned up. So I keep thinking of the dollars and what an expensive, not only do we live in tough times emotionally, but it's very expensive to maintain conflict.
Well, right, and I think, excuse me, I seem to be reacting to the heat of the room here. One of the things we have to remember is that there are companies that make a lot of money off of this, right? So we know that in terms of military contractors, we know that, and I would say that this money going, this equipment going to the police is also military contracting, right? And so it's really a matter of who's pushing for those things to be bought, and that the strongest lobbyists, the strongest voices saying to everybody, to Congress and to our in our local communities, is you need this stuff. And we don't need that stuff. It's very clear, I think, that we don't need that stuff. I think it's very clear, even in this article where it says, well, we hope it will never be used. There are other ways of, I think, avoiding conflict. There are other ways of dealing in our own communities, whether that be better relationships in the community, certainly training. We know that many police are racist. We see that all the time. We've seen that in New London. We see that in New York. We see that everywhere. Real training, real discussions and dialogue, real... Also, I think looking at the issue of mental health and putting more money into that, because I think we see, whether it's Newtown or whether it's these 2 police killed in New York, which are, all of these things are horrendous acts, but I think that we see that they're acts of people who need psychiatric attention, right? And so, and we're not putting money into that. We're not, as a society, putting enough support into how to help people in a whole lot of different ways. And why? Because we're not looking at a profit margin there. So I think that's where I think it is about nonviolent social change. I think it has to be, that call has to be from the grassroots. That call is not going to come from companies. It's not going to come from corporations. In many ways, even the agencies that do this work are not in a position to do the kind of lobbying that's needed. So I think that there needs to be kind of a general education about the need of it, an understanding of, you're right, I mean, all money spent in a community is not equal. When we talk about all this, money going into submarines, an enormous amount of that goes to buying what's put into the submarine. And that's not coming into this community. That's really a total waste of taxpayers' dollars, that we need to be looking at good jobs, and I think that needs to be clear, good jobs for everybody. We need to be looking at what that then means in our community, and not just blindly saying, sure, let's oh, good, we get some money, let's spend it.
And it has been noted that in New London, a lot of the members of the police department don't live in New London. Some do, but I think it's not uncommon for the officers who are working in an urban setting to actually mostly live in the surrounding suburbs. Right. And there's kind of an issue there that I think when they start seeing themselves as not part of the community, because we don't have many cops walking beats anymore. Right. When we start seeing that, it doesn't just threaten the members of the community. The police officers are probably right to feel fearful themselves. It just breeds mistrust and fear all around, which doesn't help.
And I think for me, that's where kind of nonviolence comes in, right? That what nonviolence is trying to do when we act nonviolently is get rid of the us versus them. Get rid of the there's good guys, there's bad guys, right? And open up levels of communication in order to deal with those kinds of misunderstandings and that kind of feeling that it's easy to see people as the other if they really, if you don't know them, if they're those people out there. I mean, I've certainly experienced that myself, even being here and protesting in front of Electric Boat, and someone walking by when I was pregnant with my first child and saying, oh, look, one of them is pregnant. As if I felt like a monkey in the zoo, it's like, and then as somebody who has lived in this community, I've lived in Norwich since 1980, I lived in Voluntown from 76 to 80, of course then you begin to know people. You live in communities, you have neighbors who work at Electric Boat, who are police, or who, and then when people get to know you, it's like, oh. So we need to find more of that, but I think what drives that, who are the people who kind of say, this is the only way that we're going to get to the kind of society that we want, is to really break that down. I think that when we look at the various ways people have articulated nonviolence, the importance is to say we don't see others as our enemies. We may, in fact, see them as our opponents. But once we start dehumanizing people, once we start kind of treating them without respect, then I think then it is easy to violate. And I think we often feel violated as people, and I think you're right. The police at this point do now. But I think a lot of that is there's also kind of a machinery of lies going on, and I think that has to be addressed. Gandhi referred to nonviolence as kind of an exploration in truth, right? And so that a police officer in New York went on BBC this morning, apparently, and said that the demonstrators had been chanting, shoot the cops, shoot the cops. It's totally untrue. That's not happened in any of these demonstrations in the past few weeks. So that's kind of, the machinery, of the conservative media is hyping that up. A Fox reporter in Baltimore redid tape, so it looked like those kinds of things were happening. So I think that we have to really be clear about that. But I want to get back to kind of the training, right? Because I do think it's a matter of, this isn't just about individuals. It is about individuals having, getting educated. I think intervening in conversations where they hear lies being said or people repeating things that they know are false. But the real social change comes when people organize. The real social change comes, and when we look at it kind of historically, it comes when people organize, when people are strategic, when people are specific about some goals, and we move forward. And we see that those campaigns then kind of multiply into movements, and we create social change. And I think we are at an amazing time now in society because, as you said at the opening of the show, there are so many things happening all at once that are there. Some are in, like I would say, in terms of police killing of young black men in particular, we're in a real crisis state now because of the killings of the two police officers in particular. We were in a crisis state before that, but now we're in a different kind of crisis state around that. Kind of where do we go and how do we move that forward? And I do think we have a responsibility as people who want that social change, but we are also in that, in particular places around the CIA report, around the ability to close Guantanamo, possibly around the exposure of war criminals in this country. So it is about not just getting overloaded, because that's an easy thing to do, especially with the holidays and people we don't want to hear about it anymore. Well, not everyone has the luxury of that, right? People who can't go out on the streets or who are afraid of their kids going out on the streets, people who are sitting in Guantanamo, people who are sitting in prison right now, they don't have the luxury of kind of saying, oh, I'm a little overloaded right now, let's not talk about it. So how do we kind of keep ourselves going and do that?
Okay, so we were planning ahead of time to talk about two local, organizations with local presence.
Right.
That are doing something, different things. So first, Voluntown Peace Trust.
Yep.
You've been involved, again, with Voluntown Peace Trust for a very long time.
Since 1976, when I moved up here and lived there.
And can you talk a little bit about the Voluntown Peace Trust history?
Sure, sure. So in 1960, there was a group of people called the Committee for Nonviolent Action, and they had been focusing on the buildup of the nuclear arms race, and particularly the weapons that we were building here in this country, and had previous few summers gone to different places in the country and focused on demonstrating, and decided to come here to New London Groton area because of the building of the Polaris submarine. And they did a campaign in the summer of 1960 called Polaris Action. People were arrested for climbing onto a submarine, for protesting the submarines. They did nonviolence training in their little storefront place on Bank Street. Actually, Barbara Deming wrote an amazing article about that in The Nation, which was then reprinted in her book, Revolution and Equilibrium. And at the end of that summer, two things happened that had not happened before to this group, which is only about 3 years old. One was that the people decided to stay in this region. They said it doesn't make sense to spend only a few months on an issue, kind of rile everybody up and then take off. And so they made a commitment to stay here in southeastern Connecticut, continue that work, and then that work branched out because they saw their work in terms of peace, in terms of desegregation, in terms of economic alternatives, in terms of the environment, all as part of what they were doing. They didn't see them as different issues, but issues that were all interconnected. And I think that continues to be an important part of the work we do in our analysis and our understanding, right? So at the end of that summer, they stayed around for a little while, and then in 1962, they bought this farm out in Voluntown, and it was called Polaris Action Farm, Pacifist Farm. Mostly it was the New England Community for Nonviolent Action. And then it is presently called the Voluntown Peace Trust, it is a land trust that was the original name that the land was given. And so here we are in 2014, and there continues to be kind of more and more generations of folks who have continued to go to Voluntown, to the Peace Trust, in order to do nonviolence training, in order to work on sustainability issues, in order to kind of get respite from the things in the world. We have a labyrinth there. We offer retreats. We do a number of different kinds of activities. We had an organic farm there, an organic garden there since 1962. And so that's continued to be a place. And I think one of the things that we've done, particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, is try to offer more nonviolence training to people in this community. Particularly in New London, we've worked with a lot of groups of, a lot of youth groups kind of offering that nonviolence training. But let me go back to the other. I was going to say the other thing that happened back in 1960 that was different, going off on one tangent, was that the electric boat workers said over and over again, as I've heard, certainly being down there for many years, go tell it to the Russians. And so some of the organizers, Brad Little in particular, was sitting in the hygienic, when it was still the hygienic, greasy spoon, the hygienic, and said, maybe we should do that. And they organized a San Francisco to Moscow walk. And they actually walked, starting in December of 1960, through a good part of 1961, and walked across this country and then across Europe and then into the Soviet Union and made it into Moscow to basically say, we want disarmament by all parties. This is not just kind of hate America, anti-American kind of perspective, which we're often accused of, but it's clearly the only way that we're all going to kind of survive is for everybody to disarm.
What happened?
They made it. Well, they did make it, and I think that bringing that message, as kind of grassroots folks bringing that message to people, they were, welcomed all across the world, really, and in Europe, and managed through, I think, all sorts of negotiations to be able to get into Moscow and kind of proclaim that call.
Wow. Well, let's look a little bit at the facilities at Voluntown Peace Trust, because it is a gorgeous place. And you mentioned that it's a good place for retreats.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And I see you have up on the screen the house was actually built in the early 1700s. It's one of the oldest houses in Voluntown. It was the Dr. Campbell House. It was built by one of the doctors there in one of the first doctors there in Voluntown. When it was bought back in 1962, it was 40 acres, and then in the late 60s, some of those folks also bought what was an old Finnish camp. The Finns settled in that area called a himsa. So now the two properties have been combined. We have 53 and a half acres. So we have the main house. We have a conference center.
We can take a,
That's the big
view.
house that's been added. So this is the conference center that was built in 1969, built after A.J. Musty, who was actually the person who, kind of well-known pacifist and labor organizer, anti-war organizer, who's also one of the people who helped them get to Moscow on that walk. This is named after him. So this is a conference center that also has a library and a small institutional kitchen. So that's really where many groups of any size kind of,
And I did want to
settle
mention,
in.
there's some work being done to put the library in order.
That's right. We've actually have 3 libraries on the property. So this library here has the books that folks were reading in the 1960s when they first got there that helped really kind of develop their understanding of nonviolence and of social change and kind of the needs, what needed to happen. And so we're in the process of redoing that library, both to have those historical books, but also kind of all of the many new, well, I don't know about all, but many new books that have been written since then. We've also, Chuck Mathai lived there both in the 60s and then came back and ran a group called Equity Trust that worked, it still does, but it's not there anymore, worked on providing support to farmers in order to be able to buy their land. He was one of the people who helped promote community-supported agriculture and the whole concept of community land trust, which was in many ways really enhanced and developed by Bob Swan, who lived there in the early 60s. So Chuck, a great admirer of Gandhi, had put together an amazing library of Gandhian books, from books that Gandhi wrote, books that were written early in that time. So we have a Gandhi library that's in the main house that are really those very, very hard to find books. And then we're developing a third library in the back of the house, in the upstairs of the office, that is more of a kind of a research library. Recently, we launched, as we said, a program called Resisting and Healing Lessons from the Vietnam War. It's the 50th anniversary of the start of the war. The people who lived in Voluntown at CNBA were very, very involved in opposing that war. We have a lot of material there that we feel like is unique. Some of it was brought from Vietnam during the war. Some are lots of not only books, but pamphlets and materials and leaflets and the like. And so we're working both with people who are anti-war activists then, but also with veterans of the war, veterans who came back and immediately opposed the war, veterans who are trying to still heal from that war. So we feel like that library will be a great resource library, but also something that'll kind of help bring more people together.
And let's look through some of the other resources.
So this is ahimsa. This is the lodge that was part of the camp, which has been built onto with that big deck out there. This is on a small brook. And so, when the brook is running, it's really beautiful, beautiful area out there. The Hartford Catholic Worker has a summer program out there every July and August, bringing kids
That's gone on for a long time.
It's gone on for, I think, 20 years now. They're based in north end of Hartford, and they bring kids to help them get out of the city. They work with kids all year long in their 2 houses there, and this has been a great opportunity for the kids to get that respite, get that time in the water and out in the clean air and the like. So this is the Swan House. This was built by Bob Swan, and Bob had built houses for Frank Lloyd Wright. And one day I picked up the New London Day, and I looked at it, I said, why is the Swan House in the New London Day? And I realized that it was not the Swan House, but a house that Frank Lloyd Wright had built in New Jersey that looked very much like this house. And so the addition on the side of that was the office that Bob built to do his work around land and putting land in trust and taking it off the speculative market. And so this building in particular, Marge Swan died this year. Bob died several years ago. This building is needing some more work and some more love and care. So we're going to be doing a capital campaign this year to kind of expand the facilities here. But so this is one of the dormitories that we use now. And it's right across, kind of across the yard from the Musty Center that you just saw.
And I'll just show
one of the brooks.
And I have one more photo of the labyrinth.
The labyrinth. So many of our viewers may have known Father Emmett Jarrett, who was one of the co-founders of St. Francis House, along with his wife Ann Scheibner, and St. Francis House is still going and growing. And Emmett was very involved in the Voluntown Peace Trust. He actually was the chair of our board for a while. And when he died, we really felt like we wanted to find a way to honor him that was really meaningful. And one of the things Emmett did was he was very involved in peace pilgrimages and in going out and kind of walking around the southeastern Connecticut area with a group of folks in the fall, kind of bringing that message to peace to many communities. And of course, we knew him as a very spiritual person. And so building a labyrinth seemed to be a wonderful way of kind of bringing together both that kind of the symbol of walking and the spirituality. So folks in our land stewards cleared an area. Actually, I think at one point had been an old dump under there. Cleaned an area down behind the Musty Center and behind the yurt that had been given to us the year before. And created this really beautiful labyrinth. So we invite people to come and walk it whenever they would like. But it's also kind of a great thing for people who are there at conferences and retreats to be able to.
Now people can come up, plan events or rent the facilities, right?
That's right, yeah. And people do, and we have a lot of, the here, again, from New London, the Nature Connection, which is now under the auspices of Red Tail Learning Center. They bring kids up once a week for a program that's for homeschool kids. So there's homeschool kids from New London and the Voluntown area and in between. I know Norwich kids who go there, who come once a week on Thursdays. I think it's a 10-week program in the spring and the fall, to explore and experience the woods and learn in the woods. And there are a number of teachers who kind of spend the day with them, kind of going through that process of learning. But we also invite folks to come up and use the place for a lot of, sometimes we do weddings, we've had conferences, we've had personal retreats, we've had people just say, I need a few days of respite, who either stay in Chuck's cabin or stay at the yurt. So it's really a multi-purpose place. And Gandhi talked about there were 3 elements of nonviolent social change. And one is the political protest, which I think we're pretty aware of what that is. One is kind of what he called constructive program, kind of, building those alternatives, which we're very committed to doing. And the third is personal development and personal kind of giving yourself that space to really develop your deeper understandings of nonviolence. You're giving yourself space to be able to be the full human being that you can be. And so we want to be able to kind of serve all 3 of those. Now, and in what ways we can.
Now, talking about programs, we have a couple more slides from the Peace Trust.
Okay.
And, now, what's happening here?
What's happening here? So this is the inside of the Musty Center. And in November, the War Resisters League and our national the staff as well as myself, organized a training for trainers on nonviolent campaigns. So it was really exciting in that we were able to bring together a lot of young people who have been involved in campaigns and a lot of older folks who were trainers who've been involved for a long time and do a lot of training, but had not necessarily learned the skills to help people go through that development of a campaign process. And so that's what we're doing here at this workshop. We spent all weekend in mid-November there at Voluntown Peace Trust, kind of going through that process, learning. I think it was important for us to have an understanding of how do we bring particularly issues of kind of sexism and racial justice to our workshops, and how do we have that being an underpinning as well as nonviolence? What are the kind of tools and exercises? You know, we're very committed to popular education. We're very committed to a participatory process. This is not a matter of people sitting and lecturing. The person that you see here in the sweatshirt was one of the participants, and throughout the whole weekend, participants were very actively encouraged and involved in, getting up there and practicing the skills that they were learning.
And I'll have a couple more.
Yeah, there's a few more of them. And, well, we've also got a piano in the Musty Center. And we were doing a kind of talent, no talent show on Saturday night. And there were a number of people in the group who said, we play piano, can we move it out? It's been in the library, kind of buried in some ways. And so we brought it out and just had a good time together. You know, I think that's an important part of what we do together is not just the work we do is serious, but we have to have fun too.
Sure.
As Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. So.
And I'm sorry, we were supposed to have a video for some reason. It worked on my home computer. It doesn't work on the laptop. So we won't see the video.
No, but let me just tell a little story. This is Nyla, and Nyla lives in New London, and Nyla is part of Hearing Youth Voices. And two of the activists from Hearing Youth Voices came. They've been very committed to going to trainings and to learning more and to developing their skills. Nyla, I think, is 16. She was the youngest person there. And amazing. I mean, I think she'll be an amazing what she says here in this video is she's here because she wants to be a trainer and she wants to be a good organizer and she wants to learn new skills. And, you know, that's the kind of youth that we want to support.
And it is amazing to me because, you know, we're about the same age and we see these people who are less than the third hour age. And a lot of them really are, they're certainly way ahead of where I was
yes.
at 17 or 18
yes.
in awareness of what the issues are and what kind of direction to go in.
Right, and a self-confidence to be able to say at 16, I really want to develop these skills to be a better organizer and a better trainer. I would agree, and I think that the older folks at the training, one of the points of evaluation that most made was how important it was for them to be there learning from the youth. It's not about the older folks or teaching the younger folks. I think the younger folks have a different set of skills, a different set of perspectives, so it really is important for us to be listening to one another.
And that's, so we'll go back to it isn't really a different hat, it's sort of a different side of the same thing, War Resisters League, which is also an organization you've been involved with for decades.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about War Resisters League.
So War Resisters League is even older than Voluntown Peace Trust. It was started in 1923. It's part of an international network of folks called War Resisters International, which I've also been involved in. And what our common belief is that war is a crime against humanity. And so we pledge not to participate in war of any kind. So we make a personal commitment as members of War Resisters League, but we also pledge to work nonviolently for the removal of causes of war. And we see that as racism, sexism, exploitation. And so actually, many people who were involved in War Resisters League were also people who helped start the Community for Nonviolent Action. So one of them, and this is a story I love to tell the youth. We did a community peace training out there about 3 years ago and told them this story, that Bayard Rustin, who some people know more of in the past year or so because he was the person who was the key organizer for the March on Washington when Martin Luther King gave the speech, I Have a Dream speech. That's kind of how most people know that demonstration, right? Bayard was the key organizer behind that. Why don't we know that, and why don't we know about Bayard very much, is he said he was an out gay man. And so that kind of, he was the behind the scenes, kind of kept in many ways behind the scenes. But he was very active with War Resisters League. He was actually on kind of lease or on lend to organize that demonstration. He had been on staff at War Resisters League. Bayard in 1958 went to, and there's a bit of a story about this. I see you have the WRL Perpetual Calendar.
Oh, yeah.
Bayard went to the Aldermaston demonstrations, which were in England to, again, focused on kind of their nuclear weapons buildup. And for that demonstration, the peace symbol was created, which was called then the nuclear disarmament symbol. And Bayard brought that back to this country. And one of the very first groups to use it was CNVA in Voluntown. So that was always the symbol of CNVA, was the peace symbol, and the War Resisters League. And so who knows that an African-American man brought the peace symbol back to the United States, and that one of the main places it was used originally was here in southeastern Connecticut, being used down in New London at the subbase, and then being used as kind of the symbol for New England CNVA.
Wow, sometimes we think we're at the center of things, and maybe we kind of are.
Maybe we kind of are.
So, yeah.
So kind of part of that, to say, and someone like Marge Swan, who just passed away, was a lifelong member of War Resisters League. So definitely strong connections there. I began to work with WRL in the early 1970s. When I lived in New York, as I said earlier, I was one of the organizers of the Continental Walk for Disarmament and Social Justice that WRL initiated. That was in 1976. Became a nonviolence trainer. And then after I lived in Voluntown at CNVA for about 4 years, and then when I left there, I'd done so much organizing around New England that a number of people really encouraged me to set up a New England regional office of WRL. And I did that in many ways kind of based on what both I did when I lived in Voluntown, but also what I learned there. And I think that the three things that part of the national WRL program, but also been very, very specific for us here in Norwich, the Norwich-based WRL, is to do the nonviolence training, to do counter recruitment, because the military is very heavily into our school systems here, and to do work around that, and then to do work on economic conversion, because I think that it's really important to live in an area that has been so dependent on building submarines, primarily here, obviously, but basically building weapons, and to say, what are the other opportunities we have? What else can we be doing? And that work's kind of changed so much over 35 years, because the reality is when we first started talking about that in the 70s, when Bob Swan first started talking about that in the 60s, we could talk about green technologies. I don't even think we called them green technologies then. And they felt like such a pipe dream. They felt like, oh yeah, right. And now that's becoming increasingly a reality, as we know. But the question is, at what point do we take that responsibility to really use it as kind of a transference away from this military dependency and this boom and bust cycle into really clean energy, clean technology, kind of green products?
Yeah. And it is a challenge, because for many people, the manufacturing industry is dead except for the manufacture of submarines in this area. Right. And if you go to Sikorsky or Pratt & Whitney, the manufacturing here is pretty much all related to the military-industrial complex.
That's right. That's right.
So, and people who want jobs that really have living wages attached to them, many of those are union shops, and you do get a good wage, and you do get health insurance. It's frustrating also, one other place that people can get jobs is in the criminal justice system.
Right.
And if you work as a prison guard, you're also probably union, and you probably get good wages and get decent health insurance.
Right.
So how do we go about creating opportunities for people to do something else?
Right, right. Well, here in Connecticut, we are, I think, the first state to have what was called a Connecticut Futures Commission. So what happened is that grassroots folks and union folks got together, asked that very question you just asked, and said, we need to kind of look at how do we study this, and how do we say, how do we move forward, what is needed, and how can we kind of make that happen, coming out of the reality that that it is a boom and that military contracting is a boom and bust cycle, with the sequestering, which is the kind of things happening in Washington. Right. And when you look at Electric Boat, how many people work there now compared to how many people worked there in the late 80s?
It's probably
a lot, maybe about a fifth.
Maybe I was going to say a third, but I don't remember.
And at times it's less than that. That's right, at the peak, when there were 24,000 between Groton and Quonset Point. And some of the work from Groton has moved to Quonset Point, so you have to, in some ways, look at them as a kind of unit, right? So Connecticut Futures Commission spent a good part of 2014 kind of looking at this issue. And I would say that I don't think they looked deep enough at how to really move towards green technology, clean technology, even though that was their mandate. I think that they did not explore enough what some of the opportunities are. We tried to bring some of that to them, and they chose instead to listen to Electric Boat talk about the next 40 years will be moving into a boom cycle with the replacement of the Ohio submarine. On the other hand, we know that places like Norwich State Hospital are being cleaned up, and that as soon as it was announced that there was a possibility of setting up a clean technology center there, which would include manufacturing, the interest came right to the, that people came and said, we are interested. And, the response had to be, we're not ready. But that there are companies out there, and on some level they may be small, but as you multiply them, they are going to be able to provide some of that. They can't do that, or they can't do it here, if we don't help make that happen in some ways. And some of it's simply just making that commitment and saying, we could have a clean energy corridor from Yukon Stores to Yukon Avery Point that includes research, development, building of all of this. I think that even though we've lost a lot of manufacturing, there's clearly a move away from assuming that we can get everything from China.
Right.
And that when we look at countries like Germany, who are so far ahead of us in this field, because the government really puts support into it, where in this country our government puts supports primarily into only weapons production. And so there's not enough of those other opportunities. So I think there needs to be that kind of grassroots call, again, that says, we know these aren't oil fields, and we know we're up against the Koch brothers, but this is a really growing segment of business that we want to see providing jobs here in our own community.
And it would use a lot of the same skills that our workers have.
That's right. That's right. And so that the actual kind of retraining is pretty minimal in a whole lot of those. And I mean, there's certain ways we've actually over the years looked at research around looking at wave power, for example, which is made from cylinders. I mean, they're just small. Think of them as small, long submarines, right? I mean, really, you're then really looking very, very much the same technology, right?
Well, we don't have as much time left as I would hope, so I want to talk about the counter-recruitment work and the different sides of the military recruiting our young people, but also the reality of life in the military.
Right.
So So,
So how do we approach it?
yeah. So where do we start?
Where do we start? I think one of the things, I've worked a lot in high schools. I'm around here for about 14 years. I went into Norwich Free Academy with a group that my son started at Youth Peace, kind of train kids to do kind of recruitment work. I'm actually doing a training coming up in February in Hartford because there's enough people around the state trying to get back into doing this. So people say, well, we've got the military and it offers jobs and it offers an opportunity to get out of the house. It offers, travel all over the country. How can we offer something alternative? Well, I think the first thing we need to do is look at what the reality of the military is, and that it's not the kind of glory glossy kind of thing that your recruiter who is basically told you'd better go out and convince these young people to sign up, right? So it's not that. So one of the things, and I think that you had that on your...
and we have it on the computer. We can kind of
on your computer. One of the things to look at is just look at the contract itself. So here's Sergeant Abe, the honest recruiter, is basically using the contract that the military has and kind of saying, if you were going into any job, would you honestly sign a contract that basically says you're required to obey us 24/7? And that one of the things we've always pointed out to people is that on the second page of it, it says, laws and regulations that govern military personnel, that's you as you're signing this, may change without notice to me. Such changes may affect my status, pay, allowance, benefits, and responsibilities as a member of the armed forces, regardless of the provisions of this enlistment or re-enlistment document. So too many kids come up to me and say, yeah, but my recruiter promised me, I have actually had kids say this, my recruiter promised me I could go to Hawaii. My recruiter promised me I could be an electrician and then I could get out and, get a good union job. My recruiter promised, and none of those things come true. First of all, they can't promise you that. They can kind of, but when they need infantry, you're in the infantry. When they say, oh, you'll go to Hawaii instead of Iraq, you go to Afghanistan. So that's kind of the history of what's been happening in the last 10 or 12 years, is people finding out that, as it says in the next number down here, number 5, is that at time of war, my enlistment may be extended. We know that, right? We know that what's happened is that people just kept getting extensions. Totally against their will, but this whole document is full of things that say repeatedly without my consent. And so I think one of the things that we say to young folks is, would you really go into a job that basically says you have no control over what you're going to do and how you're going to be told and how long you're going to be in and when you can get out? And you have to abide by our laws. Now, they say that folks have to abide by those laws, and of course, everybody feels like they need to, to kind of be aware of that. Yet at the same time, we have to look at the amount of sexual abuse in the military. First of all, as a woman, do you want to go in and be subject to that, right? That a third of women in the military have said that they have had some sort of sexual assault against them. That does not mean a third have been raped, but they have had unwanted sexual assaults against them in so many ways. The horrible part of this is that 8 out of 10 of those victims do not report it. They do not report it. And there's a recent study that just came out, done by the RAND Corporation for the Pentagon. They do these now every couple of years because finally people have gone to Congress and said, this is unacceptable. The rate of sexual abuse in the military is unacceptable. And there is an increase in reporting that's up 8% this year over the last 2 years. But still, 8 out of 10 victims do not report it because it's about the chain of command in the military, right? And so it may be, it's about the guys in the military. It may be your commander who was your rapist, or who's the best buddies with it, or who doesn't want to rock the boat in some different way. Speaking of the boat, we just saw recently that, here we have the submarine force here locally, they are, supposedly the elite in the Navy, and this guy's created a peephole and a camera and is watching women shower on the submarines. I mean, it's just outrageous that you have to live in those kinds of, and live under those kinds of conditions. And so do you want to go in and do you want to live with that? So I think that's part of what counter recruitment is about telling the truth that they don't get. The harder part is about saying, yeah, what other job can I get? But first you have to look at what kind of job is this? And is this really what you want to be doing and where you want to go? When you think, well, I could travel around the world, most people don't get off the bases. You're not going to travel and see Afghanistan. You're not going to see Iraq. And even in Korea, I've been to South Korea, most of the bases are set up where they never get off the base. They have the right to, they can, but it's not encouraged. It's kind of, so you're not really seeing the world. So I think that part of that is looking at all of that. And then part of it is we do have a responsibility to find ways of offering better jobs for these kids. So we get back to the clean technologies. We get back to how do we help provide that? How do we give, better scholarships to the community colleges in the area so kids have an out other than feeling like the only way I could get an education might be to go into the military?
Well, we have about 20 seconds, so thank you. There are websites, voluntownpeacetrust.org and also warresisters.org.
That's right.
Where you can find more information. And I think we're going to have to do another show that's just about the counter recruiting.
Yeah, I would love to. I think we did that about 6 or 7 years ago and brought one of the high school students in. So it's time to do that one again, yeah.
Well, thank you, Joanne.
All right.
And for all of you out there, next week, Constance Christophic will be on giving updates about New London landmarks. And thanks, Joanne.
Great, you're all very welcome. Thanks for having me, Ronna.
Coming round to London this Christmas time. It don't smell so good